Уважаемые гости и участники форума, на сцену приглашает...
Esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, the mayor of Moscow, Sergei Semyonovich Sobyanin, is invited to the stage. Good afternoon, esteemed ladies and gentlemen. I am happy to welcome you at the Moscow International Forum Open Investments. And this is a new platform to discuss the advanced technology and strategies of the future growth. And we are thankful to those who responded to our invitations and arrived here in Moscow. And you will be the first to know about the strategy of innovative development of Russia and Moscow. You will also learn about the plans of the innovation business and the results of this work. And today, nobody doubts about the necessity of innovative development for successful development of the state and improvement of the quality of the lifestyle of the people. And of course, very few cities and countries really become the centers of innovations. And as a mass character, they generate ideas, they form and shape the standards. Moscow assigns a very ambitious goal to be part of that community of innovative cities of the world. And I'm sure that Moscow has all the necessary prerequisites. We produce the innovative products for approximately $5 billion per year. And our city is the concentration of active, clever, smart, and very well-educated people of all ages and very active youth of our country. And today many young people, schoolboys and students of Moscow universities are planning to devote their life to innovation, science and entrepreneurship. And the demand for quality engineering education is growing, and good universities with strong tuition staff can afford to choose the best graduates of schools. And the task of the government of Moscow to create favorable conditions for talented people so that they have all the necessary possibilities for their self-improvement. And we would like to make Moscow a very comfortable place for living. And this is our future. This is the greatest value. And yesterday we opened a new office of the city agency, the Center of Innovative Development, and the major task is to offer to all those who volunteer the ability to develop themselves in the innovative industries. And we've seen lots of people in the line to that center, and the task is to support the specific innovative projects and to administer the budget funds to support innovative trends. And in other countries, we believe, and the Moscow Center of Innovative Development will become a very reliable partner for business, and the government of Moscow will continue to develop the infrastructure for innovative development. And the major problems, as they say, with the development of innovative trends is the expensive real estate and problems with the customs. And recently we have created a special customs outlet for receiving of innovative products, and they could process cargo and products in 30 minutes. Recently it demanded weeks to do the same. Of course, real estate is expensive not only in Moscow but in all large cities of the world, but Moscow has some competitive advantage. It's a technopolis. Moscow Moscow, which is a system of industrial premises ready for industrial production. And these are the satellite cities of Leningrad, and of course they're waiting for large-scale investors ready to invest into the construction and other technical parks for development of small and medium business. And we are prepared to house several dozens of research institutions and production lines. And we also going to create the industrial zones. And the ideology is just to replace the obsolete industry for a state-of-the-art industry of today. We also know the mechanism like the state and government order, and this order values for $20 billion annually. And we put our stakes at procurement of innovative products, and up to 5% the customers are allowed to place the innovative products, even if these orders will be more expensive than conventional technologies. And of course, we would like to mention Skolkovo, which is also part of the Moscow territory. And together with the federal government, we developed the infrastructure of the center, and we believe in 2014, 2015, it will launch its operation in full swing. And the next component is the convenience for life of the people. And we have very proper primary education, very well developed healthcare facilities, and also premises for rest and leisure time spending, and lots of services. Of course, there are certain drawbacks. This is the transportation and traffic jams, which you felt for yourselves. But in different periods of its development, with metro full of people, and actually this is the picture true for any megapolis of the world. This is the price we pay for the development, and Moscow is paying this price. And solution of the transportation problem, we are using construction of metro, the public transport, and we use new approaches to organize traffic control and movement, and create intellectual transportation system which is based on the most advanced and innovative developments in the world. And there are not so many cities which could become centers of innovations, and each of them had a history of success. And I'm sure the same history is awaiting Moscow. And we are absolutely open for the discussion of innovative problems development, open to your ideas and proposals, and would like to welcome you once again in Moscow and help you a very fruitful work in this forum. Thank you for your attention. Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, we begin the plenary session, Global Challenges of Humanity, Demand for Innovations. We invite on the stage the moderator of the discussion, Alan Atkinson, the founder, president of Atkinson Group, co-president of the Balaton Group. Nebojša Nikicenovich, Professor, International Institute of Systemic Analysis, and Alexander Chikhanov, Co-Chairman, Institute of Global Ideas, President of Rostock Group, Kamran Elahian, President, Chairman of Global Catalyst Foundation, and Harold Sverdrup, and Lord Aaron Darcy, the chairman of the Institute and ex-minister of Healthcare of Great Britain. Harold Sverdrup, general director of K.A. Rasmussen.
Gentlemen, good morning, and we also welcome to the stage Peter Head, who I'll introduce later. He is the director of the Ecological Sequestration Trust, but he has a much longer pedigree than that. It is my honor and pleasure to be your moderator this morning at this opening plenary panel on global challenges for humanity, the demand for innovation. My name's Alan Atkinson, and I want to thank my good friend Alexander Chikhanov for inviting me to work with you today. We're all here because we understand that Russia has an extraordinary opportunity to make a difference in the world, and we'd like to set that stage for you. We're also here because the world itself is in dire need of what this panel and this conference is about. That is to say, innovation. We live in a time when the changes that are happening to our world are happening at such a pace and are so important to grapple with that we really do not have a good understanding of the size of the challenge yet. So in order to help set the scene for that challenge, we'd like to show you a short film. This is a film that is being shown in Russia for the very first time in Russia, very short, and maps out the changes that our scientists are now calling the rise of the Anthropocene. That is to say, the human era on planet Earth, when we control what happens. Please turn your attention to the screen.
Это история о том, как один биологический вид.
This is a story about how one biological type changed. Everything changed in Great Britain 250 years ago with the innovation. And they were the first sparks of industrial revolution, which spread in Europe, in Northern America, and Japan, and then went down to the rest of the world. The railroads and highways connected the people, and medical inventions also saved millions of lives. Mineral fertilizers made it possible to feed millions of people, and the population grew rapidly. But this is actually very minor. But after 1950, there came a time of great acceleration. Globalization, tourism, and tremendous investments became the basis for the tremendous growth. And the people started to come to the cities, which became the strongest points of development. In the life of one generation, their lifestyle improved of millions of people. Health, wealth, and duration of life has grown exceedingly, and otherwise, 1 billion of people is starving permanently, and we move a lot, and we exploit 3/4 of all terrain which is not covered by ice, and this concentration of green gas have not been observed for millions of years, and the temperature of the planet is growth. We have made a hole in the ozone layer, and the level of ocean is also increasing, and oxidization of the ocean is also becoming a real threat. We are changing the natural cycle, and this is Anthropocene. It's a new geological epoch of the human domination, and this influence may cause a serious destabilization and instability. However, our creative approaches still create some hopes for humanity, and we could shape our future, and soon the population will reach the number of 9 billion people. And today we have to find the way of our development to live in the situation where we do not feel the shortage of foodstuffs and other products, and we are the first generation which confronted such types of challenges. You are welcome to Anthropocene.
The key messages in that video are about the scale and the speed of transformation in our world. We no longer live on planet Earth. We control it. We are shaping our own destiny and the destiny of the very planet on which we live. We got into these challenges because of our extraordinary capacity to innovate, create, industrialize, diffuse, spread, learn, grow. And the only way we'll get out of those challenges is by continuing to do exactly the same thing, innovating, at an ever more unprecedented, rapid rate. Russia plays a particularly important role in that process. And we're here to explore both the global process and the role of Russia in it. Russia's size, security, resources, vastness, its intellectual power, the strength of its science and technology, its will to make change. These are all potentially important tools in a process of global transformation. And we're incredibly fortunate to have a very distinguished panel to explore several aspects of this challenge with us today on the issues of energy, the materials out of which we build our economy, human health and our own capacities to live good lives, education and learning, of course the role of business and investment, and last but not least, the role of the city as a place where all of these things happen. These are the themes that we'll be exploring today in our panel. But first, to set the scene for us in big picture terms, I have the honor of introducing Alexander Chikhanov. He's well known to Russian audiences, of course, for his work in the power sector here. And as many of you know, he's an excellent speaker and a thoughtful innovator himself on the issues of global change. What you may not know about Alexander is what a good listener he is. Alexander, for several years, has been listening very carefully to some of the world's top experts on all the issues that we're exploring here today, and trying to distill the essence of what needs to happen and what Russia needs to do to address those challenges. Alexander, we're very eager to hear what you have to say.
I sincerely feel very proud to open this conference and this session with such wonderful leaders and people who think big. And I would like to enhance the temperature of your sense of being, for we are talking about innovations and about very long horizon. And 2 years I've spent to study in detail the forecasts which will be true for 20, 50 years, the next step of our history. And we have two opportunities: either the gigantic breakthrough into the future, or the sunset of our civilizations. And I'd like also to return to you with the idea. Those challenges I will be talking about, these are the challenges which are realistically have values, and we need to resolve those challenges. And such challenges we never met before in our history, and they require creative mind and innovative approach. And Clark said that any developed technology is similar to magic. We don't know how it happened. If we went back to the 20th century and told the people who lived there that today we are 7 billion and we are providing food to 7 billion, they wouldn't believe. In the beginning of the 20th century, the Malthus concept was prevailing, that it is impossible to increase the fertility of terrain, and he envisaged hunger in the future. Somehow some innovative scientists of the last, Haber and Bosch, in the beginning of the 20th century, they made a miracle. They invented the technology of industrial production of nitrogen fertilizers, which made it possible to increase the fertility of lands. And this innovation, just this innovation, made it possible to feed the population, which grew from 1.8 billion to 8 billion people. And you can see the growth of the use of fertilizers, especially starting from 1950. And China now puts into the ground 15 times more fertilizers than Russia, because they have a realistic problems of only almost 2 billion people. And innovation in fertilizers is depleting. And during the next 50 or 40 years, United Nations predicts the growth of population up to 10 billion people. And a more important trend, all analytical experts, they predict that a new middle class is growing, because the economy of China was growing during the last 20 years, Brazil, India, and many countries of Africa. And in 10 years, along with 2 billion of middle class, there will be a 3.2, and we are looking for the number of 5 billion people, and they would like to live on European and American standards. They want to have an automobile, they want to have food, excellent and diet food. And when people switch from poor food to meat and milk diet, naturally it requires more efforts in agriculture. And look for the figure. The next 40 years will demand the same amount of granary as it was created during the year 8 or 10,000 years of the history of mankind. And this is up to 2050. And that's why during the last several years, the politicians and experts are thinking how to feed 10 billion people. We don't have free lands, and those which are used are being depleted and degrading, and they require more mineral fertilizers. At the same time, we know the hazardous effect of pesticides, and now we have 5 times more nitrogen in the soil, and we don't know how to stop it, for it changes the chemical content of rivers and oceans. But we have to resolve the issue how to feed 9 billion people and the growing middle class. And 3 most important innovations of the last 19th century created automobile, developed electricity and all electrical gadgets like coolers, refrigerators, and televisions. And during the next 40 years, we plan to double the consumption of electric energy, and let alone the switch from today's oil fuel to electrical power supply, and maybe another 1.5 billion of automobiles will be acquired by the population. And it means that we have to double also conventional oil and gas resources, and that looks like a golden age of civilization if we didn't have a problem with the resources. And the problems which we felt with the climate in the end of the 20th, the question arose whether it is possible to develop on the existing base the energy and power supply industry. Bill Gates conducted the research himself, and we don't know how to replace hydrocarbons and what will be the next source of power supply. We need to find a miracle, and we have only 20 years. The question of resources is being discussed for quite a long period of time, but I would like to give you one more analog. We have 3 barrels of resources. The first barrel has been opened for long, and these are easy acquirable resources. We have the technology, and during the 20th century the price for resources went down, and actually the first barrel is about to be over. The second barrel, these are, let's say, poor resources. We have to process them with the harder effort. And what are we going to spend the resource of this second barrel to create technologies to approach the third barrel and to create a more efficient and more sustainable economy which will not depend on the resources. And this is the greatest challenge which we face. So food, climate, and resources. These are the major challenges which will interfere and will bother us for the near future. And those innovations which do not take into account this factor is a waste of money. So we need to reinvent all base technologies, all key technologies which provide food, energy, and transport have been invented in the end of 19th, beginning of the 20th century. It was a miracle from 1880 and up to 1920. Everything was made. Only 50 innovators managed to do that. And our task is, if we believe that we could feed and give water and to give lodging to 9 billion people. So we need to do the same, because we cannot extrapolate the old technologies for 9 billion people, for they do not work. They, well, enhance the content of nitrogen and CO2, and their efficiency has ceased. And new innovations should be serving 9 billion people and should be, let's say, spread among 6 or 8 billion people shortly, and they are supposed to be more effective. And here is the pyramid of innovations. All innovations, they are concentrated on top. They are called gadgets. And at the bottom, this is coal. And electricity is generated by a turbine which burns coal or gas. And efficiency of turbine is at the limit. And we are generating a tremendous amount of gadgets. And these are not innovations. These are gadgets. We need innovations in the base. We need to understand with what we are going to replace coal and how to replace the turbine. And this is extremely complicated task. So Mercedes-Benz and other people which could do 100 years ago. We need a total economy, a recycling. And if we adopt this as a decision, what we are going to do next dozens of years, we will need several dozens of years. And energy switch from one resource to another takes 30 or 40 or 50 years. We develop solar, wind energy for 40 years, and only 2% now in this energy balance. And how could we do that? And one of the best ideas which I found, which was expressed by Genadam Koshla, venture capitalists, they should bear high risks, much higher than we assume today. We have to create 100 funds of so-called black swans. They would invest 100 technologies each, and we could find 10 new Googles in energy and in food supplies, and only that could save the world. And I believe that there is a difference between Silicon Valley and Russia and Manhattan projects like agency like ARP, which stimulates the advanced technologies, but the role of the state is to correctly assign the goal and the target and to create the rules which will support innovations and will stop those technologies which lead to high expenditures. And the technologies themselves, they cannot solve the problem as they are. And Dennis Meadows and Bill Gates are using these formulas because they show the scope of the use of any resource on the planet and CO2 emissions. And there are two components of this formula, 3 and 4. Resources and efficiency. The first component is the number, and the second is the consumer activity of the people. And I have demonstrated in the beginning that the consumer activity for the next dozen of years, because it will grow dramatically, for it is middle class. And if we don't think what kind of social innovations we are going to have, how to change the culture of consumption, how to change the paradigm of success, which is based on the car, on the apartment. We can't solve those challenges which we are facing today. And in the end, as I'm an optimist, I would like to use the phrase of Andy Grohl, you think about unthinkable, for we can do that. Thank you for your attention.
That's great. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're not here to talk about gadgets. We're here to talk about serious innovation, the rebuilding of the major infrastructure, energy sources, technologies, and industries of our planet. Our next speaker is going to get us started into the nuts and bolts of this issue, the issue of energy. Without energy, nothing else happens. Professor Nakasenovic, or Naki, as basically everybody calls him, he recently directed a multi-year international study called the Global Energy Assessment, which is something like the IPCC report was for climate, the GEA is for energy. It's an encyclopedia of the energy issues that we face, the energy challenges. I urge you to download it from the internet. You'll hear a short recapitulation now, but you'll have the opportunity for a longer lecture from Professor Nakasenovic, or Naki, tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Naki.
Thank you, Alan. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real privilege to be here, and I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation. I will be talking about global energy perspectives, and I think that fits really well to inspirational talk that Alexander just gave us. It is really about the innovations, institutional and technological innovations, and the need for a major transformation in the world. I have put as a subtitle, efficiency and decarbonization innovations. What I'm trying to say with that is we need to do more with less, and for that we need investments, and we need innovative ideas. For some reason, this is not, okay, there we go, I'm sorry. Let me just start by trying to frame the problems by mentioning the major challenges. Today, we have 7 billion people in the world, and 3 billion, which you might not know, you might not be familiar with, 3 billion of those people cook with solid fuels and suffer huge health and development barriers from that. And about 1.5 billion people do not have access to electricity. Now, just think back, Industrial Revolution was mentioned. If you think back to 150 years ago, we had 1 billion people in the world, population increased by a factor of 7, global economic output by a factor of 100, and yet 3 billion, close to half of the people are excluded. Another way of looking at that is if we can connect this 3 billion, we'll be doubling the energy markets. That means huge demand for innovation. And efficiency and decarbonization, I will argue, are central. They bring multiple benefits for health, for security, and also for a long-term major challenge, which is global climate change. However, the financing requirements are huge, but I think they're doable with the right and sustained policies. Let me just mention immediately, we need to increase the investment in energy by about 50%, from about 1,300 billion today to almost 2,000 billion. This is the Global Energy Assessment. Here I have a physical volume that has been published with Cambridge University Press, but you can download it from the website above. The book involved 300 authors and 200 reviewers, and it's quite rich in material. It took 6 years to develop, so I'll just give you some glimpses into that. Let me start with this map of the world. In the color code, let me just explain the color code. If you go from green through red, this is the number of people who do not have access to modern cooking and who have to cook with solid fuels is increasing. I mentioned it's 3 billion altogether. The darker the color is, the darker the color is, the less access is. These are the 3 billion people, and going from green to red are the people who do not have the access to electricity. So if you look at the Nepal, North North India, people cook with solid fuels and do not have access to electricity. Sub-Saharan Africa, about 750 million people live there who have to cook with the solid fuels. So this is a huge potential market. Our estimate is that it would cost about 40 billion per year for next 20 years to connect these people and double the energy markets worldwide. From that point of view, even though it's huge amount of capital required, it's not large compared to the other international flows. So the first question that one might ask is, do we really have enough energy for all of these people that need to be connected? And now you know, of course, that renewable sun is huge. We can produce almost any amount of energy from sunlight, but we need new technologies, we need investments, and we need systems and infrastructures. But fossils are also large, so let me just give you a fossil picture, and I'll do it a little bit unconventionally. I'm showing you not energy, but how much carbon dioxide would be released if you would burn it. So the red square that you see up there is the conventional oil reserves. About 1,000 billion tons or gigatons of carbon would be released if you burn all of that. Then comes natural gas, another 500 billion tons, so together 1,500 billion tons. Then the biomass above the ground, all of the plants, is about the same amount of carbon. Unconventional oil, tar sands, is also the same magnitude. So all very huge numbers. And now, of course, being in Russia, the country with huge hydrocarbon resources, if you look in particular as unconventional natural gas, such as tight gas and gas shales, you can see that the amounts are truly gigantic. Even the lower estimate is truly gigantic. Coal, a very rich resource in Russia, is also huge. And then the gas hydrates, what I think in Russia, in Russian is called the burning ice, could be as large as the whole screen. So the hydrocarbons are truly gigantic. And the problem is that we can emit only a small part of it, because if you see, our atmosphere contains 3,000 billion tons. And so even just burning conventional oil and gas will not do it. We will then go way above the 2 degrees. So the amount of carbon we can still emit is about 850 billion tons to stabilize at 2 degrees. So only a small fraction, unless we develop technologies that can separate carbon. And here you see 6 projects around the world, so-called carbon capture and storage projects, very difficult technology. We control it only at the pilot plant level. Would require huge investments and de-risking, because there are all sorts of risks involved with that. But imagine the possibilities if one could separate carbon from natural gas already in Siberia, store it underground, and bring clean electricity and clean hydrogen to the markets. That would be a big part of the solution, but it requires innovations. Another area of innovation is the cities. So we need large infrastructure systems to transport and bring the energy to the people. You have heard the notion of the smart systems, producing locally and coordinating it, but that's not enough for the urbanization world. Today, 3 billion people live in the cities. By the middle of the century, we expect that to double to 6 billion people. So it's a huge, huge challenge. And what you see here is an idea. You see the energy pipeline there, transporting either LNG, liquid natural gas, for example, from Siberia, or hydrogen, and in the middle is a superconducting cable, and next to it is a magnetic levitation train. These are the type of infrastructures we need to develop. Let me just illustrate that to you. This is an idea. Huge markets will be developing in Asia. You can see the idea of producing sunlight in the Gobi Desert, also local energy, and perhaps importing gas from East Siberia through this kind of supergrid that's connected to the smart grids. But that requires this huge investments that I've been talking about. Now, the Secretary General of UN, Ban Ki-moon, has put quite a big political weight behind the idea of sustainable energy for all. There are 3 goals: universal access, that's the 40 billion I talked about, doubling the energy efficiency, so doing more with less, and doubling the share of renewables. And for all of that, we need large systems. These are aspiration goals, but I think they're doable, and I want to show you an example. This is the global energy picture today. From the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we need about 500 exajoules. That's about 12 billion tons of oil equivalent energy worldwide, and you can see that it's 80% fossil. Here is one scenario out of many that fulfills the Ban Ki-moon goals and stabilizes climate at 2 degrees. So it's a real challenging scenario. It's the one where we need a 50% increase in the investments and the new energy models for innovation. You can see that the efficiency improves by 40% by 2030. That's the white arrow. The renewables are about 30% in the energy mix. What is really important is, as you can see, that natural gas also has a fairly large share. Natural gas and renewables harmonize very well because natural gas is a kind of a virtual storage. So when there is no sunlight or wind, you can use gas, and if you do it with carbon capture and storage, and that's a lot of that in this scenario, then it's also zero carbon. So that's the nature of the challenge that might be ahead of us. For that, we need vigorous technology development, and this is my penultimate slide. I would like to highlight this. These are so-called learning or experience curves. On the vertical scale, you have the unit costs in dollars or ruble per kilowatt installed capacity. On horizontal scale, the capacity itself. So you can see that photovoltaics costs have decreased by an order of magnitude, over 4 orders of magnitude of increase in the worldwide capacity. The middle curve is the wind, offshore wind, no significant improvements, and the red and the blue is nuclear in France and United States with cost increases. This is what we need to avoid, and that's why we need vigorous investment in innovation and the new technologies to avoid exactly that. So let me conclude by showing you the last presentation, the last slide. What you see on the vertical scale is percent of global economic output. And the first thing I'm showing you is how much we would need to invest in order to improve the security, about 0.2% of the global output. To reduce the air pollution, about 0.5%. And to combat climate change, to go to 2 degrees, about 1%. But the key is, if we try to follow all of those goals at the same time by having a holistic innovation policy, then the marginal cost of doing all 3 goals would be only a tiny bit above what the climate alone would cost us. But that would bring huge benefits in the short run for security, energy security, for health. So we need holistic policies, in particular in the area of innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Naki. You know, the thought occurred to me that there are not many places in the world where you could lay out that kind of enormous challenge. And this is the kind of place where this can be taken seriously, where the resources exist, the investments are possible. Thank you for laying that out for us, Naki. Our next speaker, Professor Harald Sverdrup, is going to be talking to us about a similar problem related to materials, the raw stuff out of which we build our economies, the stuff that powers our world. Professor Sverdrup, he's from Norway. He has a rather privileged position to observe the challenges of resources that are emerging for us. First, he's a systems scientist, and he's been modeling the problems of resources for many years from his position as a professor at Lund University in Sweden. At the same time, he's also a corporate CEO and manages the largest metals recovery and refinement company in Norway, with offices in 30 countries. So Professor Sverdrup does not just study metals, he buys and sells them. And so when he says something about what's going on with metals, resources, and gold, I pay very close attention. You may also be happy to know that, in addition to everything else, he's a film magnate and has started one of Norway's new serious and professional film studios. But he won't be talking to us about that today. He'll be talking to us about the global materials challenge. And Harald, I give the floor to you.
Thank you. All Russians know chess. Could we get the first picture on? Thank you. And it was started once upon a time in India. And the inventor came to the king of India and said, I want paid for it. So the king said, okay, tell me the price. Well, you put 1 grain on the first, 2 on the next, 4 on the next, 8 on the next, 16 on the next, and you go on to fill the board for me. Good, the king said, I'll buy it. Wait a minute, says his advisor. That's going to be more grain than the whole planet. Now, this is what is happening to the way we use resources and materials. Here I plotted up the use of all kinds of different metals over time on a logarithmic scale. And if we're going to use it like the way we do, we're actually going to use more metals than the weight of this planet. Same as with a chess. It's not going to work, I can tell you that. Let's do a simple experiment. Let's do some very quick back of the envelope calculations. Burn off time. So how much do we use today? How much do we know is there? Well, this is then an assessment of 38 different metals. You don't need to read them. It's all the metals we use. And red says we're going to run out of them very quickly. We have short run-off times, burn-off times, like 10 to 20 years. Only the ones that are green come to something that's sustainable. And when we look at the photo, it's business as usual. It's all red. It doesn't start to go green until we recycle metals up to 90 or 95%, or reduce our use of them by half or down to a quarter. And this goes through all the different metals. If you look at when the peak production comes, it's in the near future. It's not in my children's time, it's in my lifetime. It's going to be my problem. You see, it's all the different important metals. But it's all about energy. Now, Naki talked about how much energy we need. Well, how much do we have? Energy is like a Coca-Cola bottle when you buy it at the kiosk. It's a limited amount. And when you suck on it, in the end, you will use it all. And when the bottle is empty, it is empty. And this happens to coal, to oil, to global energy. If you look at that diagram, you can see how the blue line is the renewables, how lit it is. So how deep is the plunge? Well, let's do a very simple experiment. Look at how much of the value which will disappear if we just take away all fossil fuels. We have a large plunge in value creation from 30 to 80%. It's a huge challenge. So resource scarcity. These are huge engineering problems. On the other hand, when we made the metals, they are here. We don't really need to lose them. But it needs that we change attitude. Think about gold. We've dug up 160,000 tons of gold in the world. We still have 150,000 tons around. We lost 7% in 5,000 years. If we really want to not lose it, we can keep it. What is important is to understand where wealth comes from. Wealth arises in human system, just like in any ecosystem, through primary production of metals, energy, and the prerequisites for food. And this creates secondary production, the creation of money and knowledge, and that goes on to tertiary production, which is about running society. And without the primary production, we actually cannot run society. We have two types of mining in our century. It's mining the earth, which is primary extraction, but it's also mining the cities. For many of our metals, there are no more metals out in society, and this is where it's easier to find them. If you can choose between a lorry of ore and a lorry of mobile phones, I will take the mobile phones. There's more gold in those than in the best ore I can buy. More metals have it like this. Recycling is actually a clean business, can be done very cleanly, and it's profitable. Actually, I think that in the coming century, this is going to be one of the biggest business opportunities we have. Not only gold, silver, copper, nickel, iron. Iron has a burn-off time of 80 years, unless we start recycling it. Then we can stretch that by a factor of 10 or 100. It's up to us to do this. Today, the world is linear. So if we keep 100 million units in the system, today we normally feed in 100 million, run it through the system, dump it out the back way, throw it on the landfill, or put it in the ocean. Well, we need to make the world circular and to go away from linear. So we can keep 100 in the loop by feeding in 10 if we recycle 90. This is the challenge we have. And I will maintain this is a very profitable proposition to do. It's not a cost, it's an opportunity. Now it's a problem when we don't do it. But I think this is what we should turn into an opportunity. Oh, you went too fast. I think we have to realize that very much of our economic growth comes from resources today. So you can decouple to a certain point. You can decouple yourself from a food to a certain point, but you still have to have it. Same with the economy. But we can recycle, which means we can eat the same food several times. And I think we also need to remind ourselves that fossil fuels will actually end during our lifetime, so it's our problem to solve it. And we can't do it with loans. Some countries have tried that, and they're now finding out why it doesn't work. Sooner or later, payday comes. So my conclusion number one is that everything is actually at stake. If we don't do anything, we're going to run out of metals, materials, we're going to run out of phosphorus. Phosphorus has a burn-off time of 80 years. It's shorter than oil, and you can't eat anything that doesn't have phosphorus. It's no substitute. Energy of all kinds is running out. Actually, agricultural land is also running out. So these are huge challenges. So it's all about the economy. Let's see here. And this is going to happen now within 15 to 35 years. Russia has many great strengths. You have huge resource potential, you have huge natural reserves, you still have a lot of even fossil fuels left. You have large land area, you have lots of possibilities for agricultural production. You have a small production relative to size, which means you're not having more people than you can handle. You have enough people to do what you need to do, and not too many. And you have good human resources, good education levels. But there are challenges. You actually need to take initiative. You need to take decisions. You need a plan for sustainable use of your resources. I think in Russia, recycling is going to be the biggest opportunity. Why don't we make Russia the powerhouse of resource handling in the world? It can be done. And I think here in Russia, we can do it. We have all the people we need to have the resources. We need to make the changes now. Big changes take time, so we need to get around and do it. There are challenges to Russian governance. Now, as a high standard as an investor, do I want to invest in Russia? There are some problems we need to fix. We need to fight corruption. We need to set the market rules properly. We need to strengthen the presence of sustainability. We need to improve the legal environment. If I'm going to go here with my investment, I need to feel safe here. We need to create proper legislation for that. And we need a strong program to reward recycling. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Harald. You know, I forgot to mention in introducing Harald that just yesterday or the day before, he was named Entrepreneur of the Year for Norway. So I want to congratulate him for that. Yeah. Now, those of you who have been watching the developments of this forum know that we were scheduled to hear from Professor Philip Sharp of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a Nobel Prize winner in physics, in physiology and medicine. He's unable to join us today because, as you may have heard, there's been a rather large storm on the east coast of the United States, which has kept him at home. I can't help but mention that storms like Sandy, storms that are, and precipitation events of all kinds that are extreme, are becoming the norm, and that this is exactly what global climate models have told us would happen. So it is entirely possible that we have global warming to thank for the fact that Professor Sharp is not with us. However, we are extremely fortunate to have with us on very short notice someone for whom innovation in the healthcare sector is a life calling. Lord Ari Darzi first made his mark by innovating within his profession as a surgeon. He pioneered a number of surgical techniques such as minimum invasive surgery, keyhole surgery, for example, robotic surgery. He served as a health minister of the United Kingdom, and in that role he reshaped the way health policy was managed in the UK, a shift from quantity to quality. And now, as the chairman of the Institute for Global Health Innovation at Imperial College, he's dedicated to improving healthcare around the world in both developed and developing countries. Lord Darzi, we are extremely grateful that you could come here on such short notice, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. It's a great privilege to be here, to be in Moscow, to be in Russia, and also participate in this very, very important opening session. Now, I think we've heard some good news, we've heard some depressing news as well. Let me just tell you what the news is in healthcare. If I could move to my first slide. Well, there is a lot to celebrate. If you look at innovation over the last century, has doubled the life expectancy in over 100 years. That's a tremendous achievement in which we could celebrate the impact of innovation in health and the life sciences industries. You can also see the biggest contributor is in public health, nearly 80% contribution to that, and at the same time, some of the major, 5 major preventable diseases, the death from those has reduced from 6.5 million to about 0.5 billion. It's also worth remembering that in the early part of the 20th century, a family was spending twice the amount of money on funerals rather than on healthcare. Because that, in many, many ways, is the main theme of innovation and the need for innovation in healthcare in this modern era of unsustainable expenditure in this very important area. If you happen to be a healthcare policymaker, if you happen to be a minister like I was for 2 years, I lost my way and I found myself in the heart of politics for some very odd reason, you will see the challenges facing you, whether you're running a healthcare system that is publicly funded or privately funded. Firstly, the growing burden of disease and the changing nature of disease, lifestyle diseases. Who would have predicted 3 years ago we'll be dealing now with an epidemic of obesity? Other lifestyle diseases are also leading to increased prevalence in diabetes, a good example, associated with lifestyle diseases. Higher patient expectations. I think we've looked at all the other sectors and the major innovations of the last 2, 3, 4 decades, whether it's energy or climate change. I think patients' expectations is something that is constantly changing, and if you fix one problem, there's yet another problem to address. The rising cost of healthcare, and I think there is a perception in health that unlike any other sector where innovation is about improving quality, reducing cost, in healthcare, for some reason, innovation always adds cost. And I could explain why. Healthcare is the one sector in which we may commission something new, but we rarely decommission the old. And that is a major, major challenge. Now, we're talking about a time in which most health economies are finding it extremely challenging to close the gap as a result of the recent economic downturn. In the US, they're spending 18.3% of their GDP on health. In the UK, we're spending 8.3% of our GDP on health. And that gap is getting bigger and bigger. And not only that, we're also about to hit with another tsunami of the baby boomers. What's also interesting about health, there is no correlation between the amount of money you spend and the quality of healthcare you get. And this is an interesting slide looking at the outputs from the Commonwealth Fund, looking at the healthcare systems and the attributes of quality in a healthcare system. And you can see the lower the numbers, the better you're doing as a healthcare system. And I'm always very careful presenting this slide in the US just in case I don't get a visa the next time I go. You can see the US spends 18.3% of its GDP on healthcare, but it has one of the worst outcomes. So that's another important message, that it doesn't mean throwing more money at healthcare, you're going to get a better outcome at the end. And that really summarizes what are the main challenges facing healthcare systems. This is a piece of work that I was involved in the World Economic Forum, which came up with these 7 bad habits of healthcare systems. And I think in Russia, you have the opportunities, without having the legacies, of redesigning a healthcare system to avoid some of these major challenges. And I'm not going to go through the 7, but the notable ones are, you design a healthcare system, you're always measuring the inputs rather than the outputs. For some reason, doing more healthcare seems to be perceived as better healthcare. As I say, most of our healthcare systems are designed to deliver what is possible rather than what is necessary. And these are the challenges that we need to address. So, I think I've made the case why we need change. So what does that change entail? And this is if you like, the 7 recommendations that we came up with about a year ago, and really looking how do you evaluate a healthcare system, and what are the fundamental changes that we need to make in redesigning such systems. Firstly, measuring value and defining what that value means, not just in terms of outcomes from a patient experience perspective as well, and pay for value. How do you transform a healthcare system from being a sickness service, which is how they were all designed about 4 or 5 decades ago, into a health and well-being service? How do you change the mindset and the value proposition of a healthcare system? How do you reinvent the delivery systems? How do you come up with the new business models in driving some of these innovations, in not just improving quality, but also reducing cost? Some examples in my own field. The chair was very gracious in introducing some of the work that I lead in areas of surgical technology. You know, we're moving from open surgery to minimally invasive surgeries. We did that about 10 years ago. We're actually moving now from surgery to incision-less surgery, which is an oxymoron, a paradox in itself. Carrying surgery without making incisions, with the combination of imaging, smart instruments, smart devices. One of the major drivers for minimally invasive surgeries, believe it or not, was the stapling technologies were actually were put together in Russia, in Moscow, in this city, in the 1960s. That has really transformed and revolutionized the concept of minimally invasive surgeries nearly 4 decades later. The concept of robotic surgery and the use of master-slave manipulators in enhancing the precision of surgery. We're going to see more of that in decades to come. I think the other big challenge is the challenge which has been the biggest burden of disease in the past, which is infectious disease, but hospital-acquired infections. One of the big challenges facing healthcare providers. You go to a hospital to have a surgical procedure, you leave a hospital with an infection you never had before, whether that is an MRSA, whether that is a Clostridium difficile. And there are some examples that you don't actually have to invest in very expensive technology. Redesigning your healthcare system, bringing the design council as we did in the UK, has had a huge impact in reducing hospital-acquired infections by a significant fold in a very short period of time, by purely redesigning the environment in which clinicians, doctors and nurses are practicing and delivering healthcare. However, the most exciting is what was recently described in Clay Christensen's book, which is how are we moving from the era of evidence-based practice into the era of precise medicine. The era in which we can predict the nature of that disease, a smarter diagnostics in which we can tailor the treatment around the needs of that patient. And you can see different disease entities moving from that very intuitive way of diagnostics into the very precise way of achieving that diagnostic accuracy. What does that mean? That means we will start in the future and move away from the era in which we treat differentiated people with an undifferentiated set of drugs. If 100 people sitting in this room had migraine, all of you will be treated with the same drug. We all know those 100 people are very different genetically and phenotypically. Understanding the genome and the phenome and combining that data is going to allow a wealth of innovation in the life sciences industry. What is that going to do to cost? Huge amounts. This is where we are in the cost curve. In other words, we treat when the symptoms become apparent and curative treatment. This is what's going to happen in this molecular diagnostic era in which we're going to be identifying disease and treating it at an earlier phase. That is my last slide to finishing off, as I can see the moderator is moving around. I think ultimately, as Moscow has led this meeting, it is systems or healthcare systems that will innovate are the ones that will survive. And I bring this slide certainly being a few years away from the 200-year anniversary of Darwin, when he very eloquently said, it's not the strongest of the species that will survive, but those who are most able to change and respond to that change. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Darcy. Well, that was, in fact, a note of inspiration in an otherwise daunting agenda that's been laid out before us. And continuing in that vein, actually, we'll talk a little bit about what it takes to invent the new and decommission the old, as you so well put it. I also noted that we heard from Professor Sverdrup that we need to decouple from food, among other things. And that was, again, heightened by Lord Darcy. That some of us can afford to decouple a little bit from food, I believe, in achieving a more sustainable future. Our next speaker, Kamran Ilayan, is listed on your program as a philanthropist, and he certainly is a philanthropist. You'll be hearing from him about the critical role of education in solving these global challenges and creating the conditions for innovation in our societies. But as you listen to him, please bear in mind that Mr. Ilayan is also a very successful venture capital investor. He's co-founded 10 high-tech companies. He always notes that 3 of them failed. That's one of the first things he usually says. And that the failure experiences were also what drove him to understand how to make things succeed. Those successes, in turn, permitted him to create a foundation and a global program that has brought the internet and educational opportunity to thousands of schools around the world. Now, if someone with that kind of business success tells us that we should be focusing our attention on education, I think we had better listen. Kamran, the floor is yours.
Good morning. When I was looking at the pedigree of wonderful scientists and highly accomplished people on this panel, I was thinking, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a simple entrepreneur and somebody who doesn't know much. How could I really be in a position to talk with such an esteemed group of speakers? I thought maybe what I should do is do what many people have done, go to the top of the mountains to get some revelations about what should be done. So the last 2 weeks before I came to Moscow, I went to the base camp of Mount Everest and about actually 500 meters above that in Kalapatra. There is some good news and there is some bad news I can tell you about my revelations. The good news is I did get a download. I did get something. The bad news is it was a bad virus, so that's why my voice is so funny and I keep coughing. But compared to the weather in Moscow, I think the weather in Everest was quite nice. No, I'm just joking. Moscow is great. I've been asked to talk about education and the role that it can play. Before I start that, I want to mention we should look at the title of this conference, Open Innovations. Open Innovations. What I believe it implies is not to create some big reports like in many of the meetings that if any of you have gone to some international organizations like UN, and you see these huge reports that are filed and nobody pays attention to them after the meeting is over. But the idea is how to find the greatest ideas and spread them around. Have it to be openly available as an open source to everyone. When we look at the opportunities that exist today, maybe a good example would be, I should tell you about my own experience. I was born in Iran, and when I was going to high school there, I noticed all of my books were at least 20 to 30 years behind what was happening in US or in Europe. So as an Iranian kid, I had no chance to get the right education to become a global player to address the issues of key importance. That's why when I was barely 18 years old, I told my father, I'm going to US, I'm going to Silicon Valley, and he said, where is US and what do you mean by Silicon Valley? Nobody in our family had ever come to US. Nobody knew where I was going. But I had to go for search of knowledge. However, today, because of the internet, because of broadband systems available from 3G to 4G, becoming more and more accessible all over the world, because of the reduction of the price on mobile smartphones and tablets and laptops, there is opportunity to provide huge amount of content in a way to empower the next generation to solve many of these problems that our esteemed panel discussed. I am a little bit of contrarian. I have participated for a few years on a number of UN meetings. I was frustrated. So much talk and very little action. I have seen how in political world, people in every country don't do necessarily what's right for their people. They do what is going to get them elected. And of course, we can talk about we need to change this, it's good to fight corruption, it's good to do this, that, that. All of those are valuable lessons. But what is really going to change every country and change the whole planet is really the next generation. This generation has really had tons of problems, too many wars, too much conflict, too much deployment of the resources in destruction of them, and too much pollution of our environment. What we need to do is to provide this information available in an open way to all the people in the next generation, and let them come up with practical solutions that make sense for them at their own local communities. And every now and then, that local solution can have regional or global applications. Let me give you one example. My wife and I, in 1996, decided to put a significant sum of our wealth into creating a nonprofit organization called Schools Online. And as part of this, we started to provide internet learning centers in more than 6,400 schools in 36 countries. The goal was to give computers, to provide access to high-speed internet, and provide access to the newest content available anywhere in the world. As part of this effort, we started to support another nonprofit organization called iEarn, International Education and Resources Network. This organization has hundreds of thousands of teachers by now in over 100 countries who all use the internet to cooperate with each other. But I will tell you, when many people were talking about is there water pollution, is there pollution of the environment, what we did at iEarn was very simple. At that time, iEarn was involved in more than 60 countries. We asked all the schools, thousands of schools in these 60 countries, to make it a class on evaluation of the quality of water nearest to that school. On a 3-month basis, the kids would go find the nearest ocean, the nearest river, the nearest lake, measure, gather some samples, send it to a regional university, and measure the level of pollution. And with this data, there was no question. On a global basis, we were destroying the planet Earth. And all that really required was grassroots efforts by the kids involved to do this. That's what I believe we can do with the 21st century e-learning solutions available to us. If you look at what Khan Academy has done, the videos which are available that teach you about all the different topics, if you look at what CK12 has done, if you look at even on YouTube, did you know that there are over 1 million educational videos on YouTube? I'm not talking about the cats and dogs singing. I'm talking about real educational content. All we have to do is make sure the children get their own laptop, get their own access to the internet, provide a contextualized way for them to go and access this information, and let them come up with the solutions. So we don't all have to be so depressed thinking of these big problems and say maybe it's time for us to commit suicide. Thank you so much.
Comrade, I think you got a bit more than a virus up there on Mount Everest. You definitely got a dose of inspiration, and thank you for sharing it with the rest of us. To round off our panel discussion this morning, and more importantly, to weave it together, to bring this diverse set of inputs on energy, materials, health, education, business into one package, we have the good fortune of Peter Head joining us. And Peter is one of the world's most accomplished large project engineers, building bridges and buildings, and then turning his attention to designing cities and urban spaces. He's worked all over the world to design urban spaces that address exactly the kinds of challenges we've been hearing about from the other panelists. Cities are where more than half the world lives. Soon 2/3 of us will live there. Peter, cities are the places where all the things we just talked about that need to happen have to happen. What kind of cities will they be?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The reason I'm here is that I haven't just been to Everest, but I have been to 33 countries in the world discussing how cities can become more resilient. And in my company, Arup, I had a team of 800 people working on low-carbon city planning. And I concluded that people were understanding which way to go, but couldn't make it happen because the public sector and the private sector were constrained by their existing narrow constraints. So I created a trust, a charity, to step into that space and to try and help take things forward. So today I'm going to describe the trust. I'm going to describe what we're going to do in terms of what I regard as the biggest opportunity is systems collaboration between all of these different ideas to create demonstration regions as places where the world can learn how to make these changes happen. In my visit to 33 countries, the one thing I learned was that we need a factor 4 innovation in developed countries in terms of resource productivity, and we've really only got 10 to 15 years to get onto that track through systems innovation. The fact that I would like to share with you in terms of metrics is 100 years ago we had about 8 hectares of land per person to support our life for energy, water, food and absorbing waste. We now only have 2 hectares each on average across the world because of population growth, and already in Russia you're living with an average of 4 hectares per person. Now in China, which has had the biggest growth of consumption, the ecological footprint, so-called, has grown at 4% a year. With 1.3 billion people and a footprint of 2.3 hectares, that requires China to find 100 million hectares of new land every year to support their urbanization. That is an area twice the size of France. China knows that this cannot go on because inflation will kill that model, and is trying to find a model of closing loops, exactly as Harold and others have described. And that's the model that we're trying to demonstrate. And at the same time, food production is now beginning to fall. Obviously, fertilizers helped us keep up with population growth, but food production per capita is now going down, and we have to reverse that too, as others have said. This is a diagram that came from working on ecological performance cities in China, and the detail doesn't matter, but here is a closed-loop system linking energy, people, resources, and urban and rural systems together. So one of my big messages is that Moscow should consider itself together with its hinterland in terms of integrating energy, water, food, nutrients, and systems together. And as Gandhi said, there's no point in running fast unless you're running in the right direction. And the only way I believe in finding a direction quickly is to create models that enable us to find that way. So in creating the Ecological Sequestration Trust, I decided if we brought together the world's leading scientists, economists, engineers, businesses, financiers, ecologists, lawyers, and we focused them in on 1 or 2 demonstration regions of the world using advanced modeling, we could show the world how to move forward in a better way. And at the heart of this idea is the creation of integrated modeling tools, and what we're now doing is creating an agent-based integrated resource and economics model that can be used by any region of the world. And this will be the first model of its kind ever produced in the world, and it will model everything under the ground, everything at ground level, agent activities, natural resource system activities, the resource flows, the pipes and wires and the materials flowing through them, and will automatically link to the climate model so that one can then test new scenarios for changing land use and other patterns. And in terms of health, one idea here is that the model will show us how by improving air quality, water quality, nutrition and mobility patterns, we can improve health by actually making it a healthier place for people to live, as well as the other healthcare benefits. When we took this idea to India, one of the demonstration regions, they said, well, how do we use it? And we came up with them with the idea of an independent regional collaboratory, which is like a campus in which the model can be accessed. And the model is built with data provided by the local stakeholders in a region. So the model is owned by the region and can then be used by them to innovate and look at the aggregation of resources and waste that are available in the region. And bringing together international companies with new technologies can genuinely demonstrate quickly a profound and economically beneficial direction. And this is what we're now planning to do. So the regions that we've chosen are in India, China, and Africa. At the moment, we're targeting the city of Kigali in Rwanda with the support of President Kagame. In China, we've reached an agreement with the Chongming Island area, about 1,500 square kilometers of the city of Shanghai. And the agreement there is for this to be an ecological development demonstrator for China. And we will be involved in the creation of an innovation park for technologies in China and internationally to be brought together to demonstrate new business models, particularly of collaboration between energy, water, waste, food production, rather than distinctly new technologies. And that's where we think the fast innovation will happen and where business models can actually develop. We also have now have an agreement with the city of Surat in India to move forward with that region to do the same thing, and Chief Minister Modi and the local city are supporting this. And the city of Surat has one of the largest industrial complexes in India, so we'll be able to look at how an industrial complex and a city and agriculture and forestry and water can all work together. So I'm going to finish with just a brief snapshot of the sort of technologies that we're likely to deploy in these regions. So improved water management strategies, improvement for recycling and drip feed irrigation of agriculture, development of storage lakes and wetlands, and all of that creating new jobs and better health and lower risk from flooding. Integrated utility systems, including combined heat and power, anaerobic digestion, biomass, water treatment, and so on, very familiar things. Energy efficient retrofit for industrial plants, and bringing urban ecology into cities to actually cool them and increase biodiversity and improve mental health. New ecological developments, low carbon, ecologically efficient development projects to demonstrate that they're possible, using smart grids linked to new smart appliances and electric vehicles, industrial symbiosis of bringing resources together, and experimenting with closed-loop manufacturing systems like cradle-to-cradle products. Waste management, reducing landfill, upcycling waste into new fashion products. Mobility systems, more walking, more cycling, better management of freight deliveries, and electric vehicle distribution systems in cities. Carbon capture at power stations, as has already been mentioned. Smart agricultural practice, which is something that Harold and his team have been experimenting with all over the world. Forestry, eco-forestry, agroforestry techniques, which are all very well known, and urban agriculture. In Japan, urban agriculture is more productive than rural agriculture. And finally, the outreach from these demonstration regions will be to support education programs around sustainability using e-learning techniques, so that we can spread the knowledge as quickly as possible from these demonstrators. And here we are in India with the Indian Institute for Human Settlements discussing what a world-class city in India would be in 2050 using some of these ideas and techniques. So in finishing, we don't have a demonstration region in Russia, but if you wanted to propose a demonstration region so Russian businesses could cooperate using this model to really experiment on how to move forward, then I'd be delighted to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for enlightening us and challenging us and laying out an agenda that is not just important to us here in Russia, but is important for the world as a whole. Now, we're running a little behind schedule for the forum, and I want to help us keep on schedule. So I would like to still have a bit of discussion. And the question I'd like to pose to each of you is in the context of the urgency that most of you have spoken about, the speed of change and the rising impacts that were also detailed in that opening video about this new era that scientists have been calling the Anthropocene. Urgency forces prioritization. Here before you is a group of some of Russia's most capable investors and business minds. I'm curious, what advice or request would you make of this audience in terms of the kind of priority that should be given to specific channels of innovation Where should they be turning their attention, their money, to advance the goals that you have just been laying out for us? And I'd like to give each of you a chance to answer that question in just a few sentences, a bit more than a tweet, but a bit less than a paragraph. Naki, would you be prepared to start?
Thank you. Well, I think that the most important priority is to start investing in the new technologies. We don't have that much time to lose. In some ways, time is the most precious resource if we are looking at the age of the Anthropocene. Just to illustrate that, many of the technologies we'll be investing today will be around for 30 to 40 years. That means if we do not make the right decisions, we'll be locking ourselves into the old development paradigms. So innovation, I think, is the key thing. But of course, it has to be coupled with experimentation. Nobody really knows exactly what the answer is. So it's important to have a portfolio. And I think this is the challenge. We need a portfolio. I've tried to argue that in the energy area, that we do need a portfolio to make sure that the number of technologies will be very successful. So, you know, many are called, but few are chosen, and therefore we need large investments.
Thanks very much. Kamran, you're an investor. What advice would you give to other investors here in the audience about the priorities for where Russia should put and place its money?
Excuse me. What I can suggest is we all have choices in life. When we are thinking about capitalism and the word investment comes to mind, we can look at two distinctly different models of capitalism. There is a model that primarily the Wall Street has been following, which is based on speculation. You buy a stock, you sit on it for a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, and you sell it, and you make money or you lose money. You hedge against the market, for the market, you make money. It has become kind of like high-stakes gambling. And all that Wall Street capitalism thinks about is return, highest level of value to the investors. Shareholders' interest is the only thing that Wall Street capitalism looks after. Then there is the Silicon Valley style of capitalism, which is based on innovation. It's not on speculation. A Silicon Valley entrepreneur wants to start a company, wants to create a product, to create a service that benefits humanity, that creates jobs. And it has four constituents. Silicon Valley style of capitalism benefits customers. A company like Apple or Google, eBay, Facebook, the customers love the product of the company. So it benefits the customers. It benefits the employees. When Google went public, Apple went public, it wasn't just one or two people who became millionaires. Thousands of people became millionaires because the profits and the ownership of the company was distributed. Third, Silicon Valley companies care about the environment, care about social issues. Corporate social responsibility is very key. And we believe you can do all of this and at the same time make a lot of money also. You don't have to cheat your customers, you don't have to cheat your employees, and you don't have to destroy the environment to make a profit. So I would highly encourage you to look at Silicon Valley style of entrepreneurship. Thanks.
Thanks, Kamran. I just returned from the OECD World Forum in India, and during that time, Tata and Starbucks announced their new partnership in India. And the CEOs, the chairman of both companies, were on the television for half an hour speaking about that partnership. And the entire subject, to underscore your point, was not profitability, although that was important to both of them. It was values. And they spoke at length about the need to have the values right to make the investments pay off. So I just wanted to thank you for making that input. Lord Darzi, if you were giving advice to investors to improve healthcare, where would you ask them to place their priority?
Well, three things. Invest in technology, obviously. As I said, technology that creates value to the patient, to the system. And I think we're moving more towards away from high cost, low impact into low cost, high impact. I think it's happening in all sectors. I think we should also think when we invest, technology has done a wonderful thing in healthcare. I said earlier, technology has added years to our lives. Just take a break and think about whether we need to add life to these years. They're very separate things, and that is where I think we should be looking at for the future. And I constantly believe that we should still invest in disruptive technologies that will disrupt the incumbent, which is virtually impossible to disrupt in healthcare because of the conservatism in the system. You could do it in any other sector, but I think there's still a potential of that, and I think governments and health systems have a lot to do in deregulating some of the very, very serious regulatory frameworks that still exist in the healthcare arena.
Thank you very much. Harald Sverdrup, as an investor in Russia, but now giving advice to Russian investors, what are your priorities?
Well, inventions are made by people, and I think Russia has a lot of young, inventive, well-educated people. These people need a room of freedom, and they need environment where their ideas can be turned into companies, to innovations. Yes, you need big investment, but it needs to be a big investment divided up into many, many small investments into all kinds of starting companies, often involving young people. And you need a large diversity of them, and you need very many. So if you can create an environment where you take care of all these ideas and innovations that young people do, you will have a steady flow of them coming all the time. This is, I think, what you could get if you wanted it.
Thank you, Harald. And Peter Head, you spoke about the need for managing all of these things as a complex system, so it's probably hard to ask you to pin things down into one or two priorities. But what kind of advice would you give?
Well, I would reflect exactly what's just been said and be very specific about it. What I would suggest you do, if you're a venture capitalist, is you find a Russian large energy company, a large water company, large waste company, large agricultural company, forestry company, and communications company. Get them in consortium, start investing in a region of Russia that is wanting to change, and then use that region as an innovation platform for young people to come along and demonstrate all of the great ideas. Give them a platform where young people and young entrepreneurs can then come through and deliver new ideas which you can then invest in.
Thank you. I think that was a very clear invitation to decision makers here. Alexander Chikhanov, can you wrap this up for us and put it into the big picture context as well as the Russian context?
Наш форум называется «Открытые инновации».
This forum is called Open Innovations. I did not quite understand what that is until a friend of mine from Germany who speaks some Russian, he said that a more accurate wording, because how can innovation be open? He said it'd be more accurate to say innovative openness. In light of the global challenges facing humanity for the next 50 years, there's this one chance to resolve our issues, and that is innovative openness and close friendship, very close friendship between all innovators, investors, governments of all the world. I am not a card player, but I know there's this point in time in card play during the card game when everyone's supposed to open their cards and put them on the table. So We've studied all the clean tech portfolios in the world, and as gurus of this business, we cannot see those Googles of the world in energy, in food, in the food sector, and it is unclear who will be the one to find the solution. Is it going to be in India or China, where the issues are ominous? They need a inexpensive solution. They don't need a $1,000 solution. They need a $10 solution. Maybe they will find a solution for a 9 billion world, and not those gurus in Silicon Valley who have huge capitals, Berkeley laboratories. They have extensive venture business experience, but they are unable to think in a way to find solutions for 9 billion people. Therefore, only innovative openness is the only principle. All cards open on the table. And what Peter had said, this is surprising. I will try to find everything possible to find the solution, to make it possible in Russia, because we need to change something in here. It's not, we need to change our creative attitudes. What do you need to build conceptually a brand new city? Forget about your stereotypes, 200 years old. New water waste systems, new water treatment, new closed loop water recycling, and other things. It should change your brains completely. Architects, engineers, construction people. Well, beginning of October, I was in a Roman club in Bucharest and met a Chinese billionaire, and I was amazed at what he's done, because he started selling air conditioners and now built a whole empire. He lives in China, and he's got huge issues every day, and he changed the paradigm of skyscraper construction technologies. There's a video. It's amazing. 20 level office building with hotel rooms is built totally from scratch, turnkey, with curtains on the windows, all the ventilation, heating, in 360 hours. The construction site opens for 360 hours. They stop the traffic and everything. 360 hours later, they take the fence away, and you have a super state-of-the-art office building anywhere. It is 5 times, say, more cost-effective. It has everything there. It is seismic resistant. It's a revolution, and it's done by a simple person from China. And you know, I'm always worried about the position of Russia. And what's the problem? It's like as if we were sidelined, as if we didn't have serious problems like in China or India, where they have 4 billion living on the territory of equal to all of Russia. And this drive, like in Silicon Valley, we're kind of we cannot do it like a person from London can think about problems of other people of other countries. We cannot do it because they think it's important for those people in those other countries. And those very successful architects in England changed completely his position and went there to work on those problems of the world, because the situation there is very serious, because the developed world knows about it, and existing technologies otherwise will destroy the ozone layer and the carbon layer and everything. So there's this fashionable phrase on all sustainable development conferences: the rich world must pay the safe development of the world where 6 billion people live. This is a completely different paradigm. So I urge innovators, venture capitalists, investors, governments, everybody, to do 2 things. We need 20 people like Edison. We got to find them on planet Earth. Where can we find those people like Edison, Tesla? And we need to open our cards and sit at the same table. That's the only way.
I think you've been given a feast for the mind today, a lot to think about. And I think that the closing words that I want to pluck out of what Alexander said were friendship and revolution. So leaving you with the idea of being in a friendly revolution to reinvent industry in the world and here in Russia. We send you off to the rest of the forum. We hope you have a fabulous time. And let's thank our esteemed panel for generating such a brilliant set of reflections for us to think about.
Как вам работа? Мне понравилось.